Ground control, do you read me?
A voice buzzed over the radio. I leaned forward at my chair, studying the signal received from our station in geostationary orbit. As I turned my microphone back on, I briefly admired the fact that the message was coming from over 35,000 kilometers away, from a little metal box hanging in space as it slowly orbited Earth. "I hear you loud and clear, Holloway. Good to have you back," I responded with overwhelming relief filling my voice. The astronauts aboard the G.S.S.S had been out of contact for the better part of an hour. Whether it be due to some kind of interference or technical problems remained to be answered. But it alone had put us all on edge, considering anything in geostationary orbit as an orbital period equal to the Earth's rotation. In layman's terms, it means that the station never strayed out of reach relative to our position on Earth. "What happened out there? We lost contact for a moment," I asked. The rest of the crew in ground control sat in silence, each of the scientists listening in on our conversation. I felt relieved, but something about Holloway's voice sounded so urgent, almost scared.
"We found something,"
he began.
"We're not exactly sure what, but that's what cut us off. We just lost signal."
"You found something? Could you be more specific?"
"I can do you one better. I'm uploading the missing footage as we speak,"
Holloway said. The G.S.S.S had remained under constant supervision since its launch in early 2012. It was a covert mission, meant both to study human endurance in space and to track foreign bodies entering Earth's orbit. Within a few minutes, the missing video and a few photos had been uploaded to the server. While the footage itself mostly showed the inside of the station and the astronauts gathered at one of the few windows as they tried to figure out what had happened, I was more interested in the pictures. I opened up the first one, displaying it on the control room's main screen. It was pointed outward from Earth into deep space, filled with a starry sky that one couldn't dream to observe from Earth itself. But in the center of the photo lingered a black patch of nothingness, as if a part of the picture had failed to receive any sort of light exposure. "Holloway, what exactly am I looking at?" I held my breath as I awaited a response. I'd never seen anything quite so empty. It felt like I was staring into a black hole, but that obviously couldn't have been the case, as it would have annihilated the station within a split second.
"We don't know. It just hung there, approximately 25 meters away from our station as we passed. We couldn't get any readings on it. No radiation, no movement, no force, nothing. According to our instruments, it doesn't even exist."
"Can you still see it?" I asked.
"No, we passed it 47 minutes ago. Just regained contact. It appears to be locked in its orbital path. It doesn't make any sense. But following this trajectory, we'll see it again in just over 23 hours. We'll send more data then."
The next day was spent by the office, analyzing the little information we received from the crew aboard the G.S.S.S. But with only a picture and limited readings claiming the black spot in space didn't exist, we could do little except wait. Yet none of us ventured home for some much needed shut-eye. Instead, we waited at the office as 1,000 different theories formed in the back of our minds. Then, around the same time the following day, we lost contact with the crew. By then, we already knew what was going on. While it was a worrisome phenomenon, we knew it wouldn't even last an hour. Sure enough, as the day before, it was a temporary problem.
"Ground control, we have a problem. Do you copy?"
A voice called through the radio. At first, I didn't recognize the voice. Holloway was the man in charge of the station, so to speak, but whatever reason, someone else had taken it upon themselves to contact us. "This is ground control. Who am I speaking to?" I asked, not able to recognize the voice due to interference.
"It's Matthews. We passed by the hole again. It's bigger. We only missed it by a few meters. Next time we pass, we'll hit it."
"Alright, Matthews, you have to change the station's attitude immediately. Then, I need to speak to Holloway," I ordered.
"We locked him inside the sleeping quarters. He's lost it."
"Lost it? What happened?" I asked.
kept staring outside the window as we passed the hole. Then, he just went unresponsive. By the time we figured out what was happening, he had already sabotaged the CMGs. We're drifting.
Can you repair it? Was all I could think to ask.
I don't think so. We'll need to... Wait. How the hell did Holloway get out? Stop it!
The message was cut off abruptly. Matthews! Are you there? I practically screamed into the radio. We desperately scrambled to regain any contact, but no matter what we did, the G.S.S.S remained dark. Hours passed with the station headed for direct collision with the strange cosmic phenomenon, and even if the crew was still alive up there, we hadn't the faintest clue what would happen when they finally crashed. By the time another day had passed, most of us had gone upwards of 70 hours without sleep. Some had collapsed on their desk, and every available crew member had been called in, but it wouldn't help. But exactly 27 minutes before impact, we received the last transmission we'd ever get from the crew aboard the station. This is what we heard.
Ground control, this is Matthews. The comms were sabotaged after Holloway escaped. We've lost him alongside Garcia. We had to kill them. They didn't leave us any choice. We've spent the past day trying to shift our course, to no avail. I don't know if I can get the radio up and running for long enough to send this message. In about 15 minutes, we'll lose contact as we get within reach of the hole. Then, we'll collide. I don't know what will happen once we do, but I doubt any of us will ever get to see Earth again.
He paused for a moment, his breath turning erratic as it became obvious just how scared he was.
Don't forget our names once we're gone. Frank Matthews, Melissa Cameron, David Rikers, Henry Jenkins. We're about to venture into an unknown world. Tell our families we're sorry we couldn't make it home. Tell them that Kyle Holloway and Gabriel Garcia died as heroes. What happened wasn't their fault. I wish we had more time. Goodbye.
With that final transmission, contact was once again lost, as well as any visuals we had on the station. It had entered the dark rift in space, and as we pointed out telescopes at its supposed location, we could see it grow in real time, slowly expanding across the night sky. While it was too little to be seen unless told where to point, we estimated that merely a year would pass before it could be seen through a hobby telescope. Within 2, it would be visible with the naked eye. We mourned the astronauts that would never be mentioned in any kind of news outlet. Their mission to expand the scope of mankind had been secret, so their deaths would go unnoticed by all those who loved them. I thought it odd that such is the destiny for most of mankind. As death finally grips us, we're all too quickly forgotten. Even the heroes, the greatest minds, and the most famous stars will eventually be washed away by time itself. To the great unknown of the universe, we're all equally expendable. Once we'd scanned the sky for any trace of debris that might have originated from the station, we finally realized that it hadn't been just destroyed, but swallowed up into the dark rift. It didn't matter where we looked, or what kind of probes we sent out to search for the dead crew. They were erased from our part of the galaxy. But in the wake of their demise, something sinister lurked in the back of our minds. What would happen as the rift grew? And would it ever reach Earth? There was little we could do except observe until a probe could be sent out. A job that on its own would make the better part of a year even with an exceptional amount of funding. Of course, getting money was an easier task when a planet-ending catastrophe would annihilate us within the decade. 6 months we spent observing as the rift was growing exponentially in size. What had started as a pothole-sized rift had grown as large as a house. We recalculated, estimating that within 5 years it would expand enough to consume Earth. Then, one night, as I was packing up my things, dreaming of a bottle of whiskey, which I need to aid me sleep through another panic night. I got an alert blaring from my computer. It was already late, leaving little more than a skeleton crew at the base, meaning I'd have to stay behind to deal with whatever minor error it probably was. I walked back to my computer, dropping my things as I realized what had just been detected. It was G.S.S.S emerging from the rift and moving towards us. The signal was weak, but unmistakably belonged to the station. I grabbed the radio and attempted to make contact. "This is ground control. Does anyone copy?" I called out in excitement, knowing fully well that even if the crew survived the initial disappearance, they would have long since starved to death, as they were just a week away from the next supply delivery by the time they went missing. "Is there anyone there?" I repeated, to no response. With that, an emergency was declared, calling all available personnel to work. According to the signal we received from the CPODs, there was no signs of life aboard the station. So we initiated a station-wide forced download of all footage, all data, everything we could get our hands on before the station hit our atmosphere and burned up. People were running around, screaming orders at each other as petabytes of corrupt data loaded itself onto our hard drives. We were frantically trying to find a way to redirect the station so that it would burn up completely in the atmosphere and not rain down as debris on innocent people. But it was a futile task, and we still hadn't calculated its exact trajectory. But in spite of our best efforts, the station had gone dark. Even with the limited contact we had, any ability to maneuver once there had been disabled, either by outside forces or by internal sabotage. All we could do was watch as it disintegrated over the west coast of Mexico, landing 13 miles offshore into the ocean. While it was not an event easily visible by the public, no one knew the nature of the incoming debris, even had they seen it. We scrambled to send out a crew to pick up what little salvageable junk we could find, hoping to at least find traces of the dead astronauts. And while the salvage team was on task, we set out to repair the downloaded footage. In terms of observation, the G.S.S.S stood unmatched. Every inch of the station was monitored 24 hours a day, with the limited exceptions of the lavatories. We had eye on the astronauts all the time, not only with visuals and audio, but the systems functioning. Usually, it was a semi-live feed, but in times without contact, the data was quickly downloaded, which meant we already had everything up until the moment they were swallowed by the hole. After the fact, there was less information. The first few hours of footage remained intact, so the office gathered around to observe it, none daring to speak a word as we got our first look into what could only be a completely new world. A picture came to view, taking place during the last moment of our conversation.
"Can you repair it?"
I heard myself ask over the radio. Matthews was standing there, his face glued to the various panels used to control the CMGs. Holloway had managed to break out and had torn the comms apart. Based on the limited view we could get of him on the footage, he looked emotionless, empty.
"Stay the fuck back!"
Garcia yelled as he held up a wrench. Floating around in zero gravity made fighting a different kind of challenge, but a proper swing could still significantly injure anyone unfortunate enough to be a recipient. Garcia and Matthews grabbed onto Holloway and brought him back into the sleeping quarters, where they tied him up. All the while, he never spoke a single word. He just kept staring at the windows.
"What happened to you?"
Matthews asked with no response.
"We gotta fix the comms."
Garcia chimed in. Cameron and Rikers were already hard at work trying to repair the CMGs, while Jenkins was attempting to piece together what remained of the communication station.
"The gyroscopes are more important. If that hole keeps growing, we'll hit it during our next orbit."
Matthew said.
"Stay with Commander Holloway. I'll check on the others."
Matthew exited the sleeping quarters while Garcia sat by Holloway.
"Come on, you have to talk to us. Why did you sabotage the station?"
Holloway still refused to respond. He just kept staring out the window.
"Did you see something in the hole?"
Garcia asked. That time, Holloway turned his direction back at Garcia, finally acknowledging that he had heard the question. He appeared to be whispering something, but it couldn't be heard over the audio channels.
What was that?
He asked as he bent closer. Holloway then whispered something inaudible to Garcia, who instantly stood back up in shock. The concern, the fear that had been visible on his face only moments before, had been washed away and replaced by a bizarre sense of apathy. He bent down to untie Holloway without speaking a word. The two of them both looked hollowed out, just uniformly working together.
Garcia, what did you do?
Jenkins asked as he saw the two of them enter the main section. In response, Garcia just grabbed one of the tools Jenkins was using and hit him over the head. Blood poured out of the wound, suspended in the weightless environment in red small balls. Seeing what was about to happen, Matthews, Rikers, and Cameron all pushed themselves towards the two psychotic crew members and did their best to disarm them. Their struggle drove them across the ship as Jenkins' blood started hitting the wall. Most of the sensitive electronics were secure, but where the blood managed to enter, a few unimportant systems were destroyed. Garcia was by far the largest of the group, and even in zero gravity that proved an advantage. But at some point in the fight, Cameron managed to get a kick in, pushing Garcia headfirst into the airlock. Then they pushed Holloway with them and locked it.
What the fuck do we do now?
Rikers asked. Cameron was busy attending to the wounded unconscious Jenkins. His wound was bleeding profusely, but Cameron quickly applied a makeshift bandage to prevent his blood from covering the walls of the station.
Come on, stay with me,
she yelled. Once he was deemed stable, Cameron joined the rest of her crew in trying to repair the control movement gyroscope. While the comms were important, the main priority was getting the station away from the Void's orbit before collision. The crew spent the next 20 or so hours trying to repair the hopelessly damaged CMGs, but it was a futile task. None of them had known the system as well as Holloway, and with him locked away, there was nothing they could do. Around the 20th hour, a clunk could be heard coming from inside the airlock. Holloway and Garcia had somehow managed to break a hole in the wall, giving them direct access to the airlock's door mechanics. Despite their psychotic state, they were well aware of the station's systems.
Holloway, stop it!
Matthew called over the station's speaker system.
If you damage the airlock, we're all going to die.
But the two men didn't care. They were so far gone from their former selves that not even the immediate threat of death seemed to worry them.
We have to eject them,
Riker said.
Kill them?
Cameron chimed in.
We can't.
Despite her opposition to the idea, her voice was meek. She was smart enough to know that there wasn't another choice.
Either they die, or we all die. At this point, it's not even a question of morality, but simple math.
Both Cameron and Matthews looked at him in despair. Jenkins wasn't even conscious and able to give input. They just nodded, all of them knowing exactly what had to be done.
Holloway, Garcia, you either stop that shit, or we eject you into space. You're going to die if you don't stop it,
Cameron said over the speakers, but her message was ignored.
It's time. Let's just get it over with. As the next in command, I'll pull the trigger,
Matthew said. Everything had already been prepared. All that remained was to input the command that would override the system and kill the crewman.
May God forgive me for this,
he mumbled to himself as he hit enter. The inner airlock sealed itself while the outer prepared to open. Within a minute, the door opened and the two men were forcefully pulled into the vacuum of space. There are many misconceptions when it comes to death by the vacuum of space. Contrary to common belief, one does not immediately freeze, nor does your body explode from the sudden change in pressure. Truth be told, death in space is one of the least dignified ways of living life. The air would be sucked out from your lungs with a great likelihood of rupturing them in the process as the saliva on your tongue boils. Whatever still left in your intestines would be equally removed. Within 15 seconds, you would lose consciousness due to hypoxia. I took solace in that fact as I looked over the footage, that at least the poor astronauts weren't awake to experience their horrible deaths. The crew stayed silent for a few minutes after the ejection. None of them were brave enough to break the silence, until Matthews finally realized he was now in charge of the station.
The GMCs are done. We need to try to get a message out before the void swallows us,
he said with a defeated voice, albeit with a hint of purpose. They only had a few hours until impact, and who knew exactly how large the hole had grown during the past 24 hours?
Cameron, how are we doing?
Matthews asked after a couple of hours' work.
It's not looking good, but I think we might be able to get a simple message through. But we gotta be fast. We're going to lose in less than an hour,
she said back.
You want the honor? You're in charge now after all.
So, while Cameron and Rikers went to check on Jenkins, Matthews went on to send the last living message we'd ever received from the crew.
Ground control, this is Matthews.
After we listened to the message for the second time, the black void had appeared outside the window. The crew had gathered, hugging each other as they approached within mere meters of it.
This is it,
Rikers let out in a panicked whisper.
Oh God.
With that, every ray of light, artificial or not, vanished from the station. A minute of yells and beeps followed as the crew scrambled to turn the lights back on. But based on everything they said, the systems hadn't gone down. The light was simply consumed by the void. In many ways, the place acted like a black hole without affecting physical mass in any destructive way.
How are we still alive?
Rikers called out.
I don't know. Why aren't the lights working? Is the station dead?
Cameron asked.
It's not just the station. Look outside,
Matthew said with a horrified voice. Outside the window, there was nothing but infinite darkness, rid of any light. There was a strange tinge of blue just barely touching the surface of the station, but where it had come from, no one could say. That weird illumination created eerie outlines inside, allowing the crew to just about move around without hitting the walls. Then, the fog of darkness started to fade, and the lights inside the station slowly came back to life as if the unseen force had just been removed. Once they secured the inside of the station, they all gathered at the windows and just fell into deafening silence. I couldn't blame them, because the world that existed outside in the empty vacuum of space was unlike anything known to mankind. If I hadn't seen the footage myself, I never would have believed it. As the footage played, our offices received a call from the team running the salvage operation. They could confirm that the wreckage definitely belonged to the G.S.S.S, but there were no traces of the astronauts anywhere in the mess. They had not returned with the station. Not knowing what to say, I just redirected my attention towards the still playing footage. Wherever the astronauts had ended up, none of us knew. But one thing was certain. The astronauts were no longer within our realm of reality. They were in a nightmare.